My name is Eliana. I was 28 when I came home after 7 years away and realized the place I had built for my mother no longer belonged to the woman I built it for. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence you feel when you walk into a familiar room after a long journey. This silence felt careful, like the walls themselves were holding back words. I stood outside the front door, my hand resting on the old brass handle I had chosen years ago. I remembered standing there with my mother on the day we received the keys. She had cried quietly, touching the walls as if they were something alive. "Your grandmother would have loved this," she whispered that day. I smiled because I believed I was giving her the one thing she had always deserved, a place where she finally felt safe. But 7 years later, the woman who opened the door wasn't my mother. It was my sister-in-law, Clara. She looked surprised for half a second before forcing a polite smile. "Eliana? You didn't tell us you were coming."
Us.
That single word felt strange. I looked past her shoulder and saw unfamiliar decorations hanging in the hallway. Family photographs had replaced the paintings my mother loved. The small wooden table where she used to write her morning notes was gone. "Where's Mom?" I asked. Clara hesitated. "She's in the back room." The back room. Not her bedroom. Not Mom's room. The back room. I walked through the house slowly, noticing tiny changes that seemed meaningless alone, but painful together. The flowers my mother used to keep by the window were missing. Her favorite chair had been moved into a corner. Even the framed picture of us from the day I bought the house was nowhere to be seen. Then I found her. She was folding old clothes into a small box, sitting beneath a dim light. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And in that quiet moment, I understood something I had refused to believe during all those years away. My mother wasn't living in the home I gave her. She was only existing inside it. And somehow, I had to discover how that happened. My mother looked up at me like she was seeing a memory instead of her daughter. "Eliana?" Her voice cracked slightly. I wanted to run toward her. I wanted to hold her and ask why she never told me. Why, after everything we had been through together, she let me believe she was happy. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she quickly wiped her hands on her sweater before hugging me. Maybe it was the way she glanced toward the hallway first, as if checking whether someone was listening. Or maybe it was the fact that my mother, the woman who raised me to speak honestly, had suddenly learned how to hide pain. "You're really here," she whispered. I smiled, but my eyes were already searching the room. It wasn't what I expected. When I bought this house, I imagined my mother filling every corner with pieces of herself. Her books on the shelves, her plants near the windows, her music playing softly in the mornings. Instead, the room looked temporary, like someone had packed her life into a few boxes and told her not to take up too much space. I looked at the cardboard box beside her. "What's in there?" She immediately placed her hand over it. "Nothing important." That answer hurt more than I expected, because my mother never said nothing important. She was the woman who kept handwritten birthday cards for 20 years. The woman who saved every little drawing I made as a child. The woman who believed small things carried the biggest memories. I sat beside her. "Mom, why are your things in a box?" She looked toward the window. Outside, the garden I planted for her years ago was still there. The roses were growing wildly, reaching toward the sunlight. It was strange. The garden looked more alive than the person who cared for it. "I didn't want to cause problems," she finally said. Those words stayed between us. "Cause problems." I repeated them silently, because suddenly I remembered every phone call over the last few years. Every time I asked, "Are you okay?" And every time she answered, "Of course, sweetheart. Everyone is taking good care of me." I believed her, because I wanted to believe her. After dinner, I walked around the house quietly. I noticed things I had ignored during my short visits before. My mother's name was missing from the mailbox. Her emergency contact information had been changed. The family calendar in the kitchen had everyone's schedules written on it except hers. Small details. Small enough that someone could explain them away. But together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. Later that night, while everyone slept, I opened the old wooden drawer beneath the staircase. It was where my mother kept important papers, the house documents, the memories, the things she trusted me to protect. Inside was a single envelope with my name written on it. Not by my mother, by someone else. And the moment I saw the handwriting, I knew this wasn't just about a room, a box, or a misunderstanding. Someone had been making decisions about my mother's life, and they had been doing it without me knowing. I stared at my name written across that envelope for longer than I wanted to admit. Not because I didn't recognize the handwriting, because I did. It belonged to my mother. But the strange thing was the letter wasn't old. The paper looked new. The edges were clean. There were no faded marks, no signs that it had been sitting there for years. My hands felt heavier as I opened it. Inside was a single page. No long explanation. No dramatic confession. Just a few lines written carefully, like every word had been considered 100 times. Eliana, if you are reading this, it means I finally stopped pretending everything was okay. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth. I was afraid that if you knew, you would come home angry. And I never wanted my children to become enemies because of me. Love, Mom. I read those words again, and again, because somehow the apology hurt more than the betrayal. My mother wasn't apologizing because she had done something wrong. She was apologizing because she had been carrying something alone. I folded the paper slowly and placed it back on the table. For a few minutes, I just sat there in the darkness. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the old wooden floor making small sounds as it settled, the clock on the wall moving 1 second at a time. Everything felt normal. And that was the hardest part. Sometimes the biggest wounds don't happen during loud arguments. Sometimes they happen quietly, while everyone is smiling at the dinner table. The next morning, I asked my mother about the letter. She froze. Not dramatically. Not like someone caught doing something wrong. More like someone whose secret had finally become too heavy to carry. I didn't want you to find that yet, she said. Yet. She looked down. Because I was still hoping things would change. That sentence confused me. What things? She took a deep breath. Then she told me something I never expected. After I moved overseas for work, my brother Daniel and his wife Clara had offered to move into the house temporarily. They told my mother they were only helping her manage everything. They said she shouldn't worry about bills, repairs, or household responsibilities. At first, my mother was grateful. She thought family was stepping in because they cared. But slowly, things began changing. Her opinions became old-fashioned. Her belongings became clutter. Her routines became inconvenient. Nobody directly told her she didn't belong. They didn't need to. Sometimes people make you feel unwanted without ever saying the words. They simply create a world where you start questioning whether you deserve to be there. I looked around the room again. The room where my mother had been sitting quietly. The room where she packed her memories into boxes. And for the first time, I felt something stronger than sadness. I felt clarity. I knew I couldn't fix 7 years of silence in one conversation. I couldn't erase the moments my mother felt invisible. But I could finally see the truth. And the truth was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother sitting beside that cardboard box, carefully folding pieces of her life away as if she was afraid someone would complain about the space she took. I walked downstairs quietly. The sunlight entered through the same windows I had chosen 7 years ago. I remembered standing in this exact kitchen with paint samples in my hand, asking my mother which color made the room feel warmer. She chose a soft cream color. Because a home should feel like a hug, she had said. I wondered when this house stopped feeling that way for her. I opened the drawer where my mother kept important documents. This time, I wasn't searching for answers out of anger. I was searching because I needed to understand. Beneath old receipts and faded photographs, I found a folder with the original house papers, the deed, the insurance documents, the renovation records. Everything was there. And then I noticed something unusual. A second folder was hidden underneath. My name wasn't written on it. Neither was my mother's. It simply said, Family Agreement. My heart sank slightly. I opened it carefully. Inside were printed emails, notes, and copies of conversations between my brother Daniel and Clara. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I started reading. They had been discussing changes to the household. Not illegal changes. Not something dramatic. Something much more complicated. They had slowly convinced my mother that she was becoming too dependent. They suggested she move into the smaller room because the larger bedroom was more practical for them. They suggested removing some of her furniture because the house needed a fresh look. They suggested making decisions without asking her because, in their words, Mom gets emotional about everything. I stopped reading. That sentence stayed in my mind. Mom gets emotional about everything. I knew my mother. She cried during movies. She cried when flowers bloomed in spring. She cried when she heard a song that reminded her of her childhood. But being emotional was never her weakness. It was the reason she loved people so deeply. I placed the papers down and closed my eyes. For years, I had been working harder and harder, believing I was protecting my mother by giving her financial security. But I never realized something important. A person can own a house and still feel like a guest inside it. I heard footsteps behind me. My mother was standing there. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. "You found them," she whispered. I nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away. "Because Daniel is your brother." That answer broke something inside me. Not because she defended him, because it showed me how much she had sacrificed to keep peace. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting the family, even when she was the one hurting. I walked toward her and held her hand. "Mom, keeping everyone together shouldn't mean losing yourself." A tear rolled down her cheek. And for the first time since I came home, she didn't apologize for crying. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about taking back a house. It was about helping my mother remember that she had a voice. And I was finally ready to help her use it. For the rest of that day, I carried the folder with me, not because I needed proof anymore. I already knew what happened. I carried it because I was trying to understand how people who loved my mother could slowly make her feel like she was a problem to solve. That was the part one couldn't accept. It would have been easier if there had been one terrible moment, one argument, one obvious betrayal. But life rarely works that way. Sometimes relationships change through hundreds of small moments. A decision made without you. A conversation you're not invited to. A chair moved. A photograph removed. A voice slowly becoming quieter. That evening, Daniel came home. My older brother. The person I used to follow everywhere when I was little. The person who taught me how to ride a bicycle. The person who once told me, no matter what happens, family always protects family. Seeing him now was confusing, because the memories of the brother I loved and the choices he made didn't fit together. "Eliana," he said, surprised. "You're still here?" I smiled politely. "Yes, I'm still here." Something about my answer made him pause. We sat in the living room, the same room where my mother used to host birthday dinners, the same room where we once laughed until midnight. But that night it felt different. Like everyone was carefully choosing their words. "I think we need to talk," I said. Daniel looked uncomfortable. "About what?" I looked around the room. "About Mom." His expression changed immediately. Not anger, not guilt, something closer to fear. "Eliana, I know what you think you saw." "No," I interrupted gently. "I don't think. I know what I saw." The room became silent. I expected myself to feel angry. I expected my voice to shake. But strangely, I felt calm. Because anger comes from not being heard. Clarity comes from finally understanding. "I know you and Clara try to help," I continued. "I know you had responsibilities. I know life gets complicated." Daniel looked relieved for a moment. But then I continued. "But helping someone doesn't mean making decisions for them." He looked down. "She never complained." I nodded slowly. "That's true." I looked toward the hallway where my mother's room was. She didn't complain because she spent her whole life making sure everyone else was comfortable. My brother didn't answer. And somehow his silence told me more than his words could have. A few minutes later, Clara joined us. She immediately sensed the tension. "What's going on?" I placed the folder on the table. Not dramatically. Not like a weapon. Just quietly. This. She opened it. Her eyes moved across the pages. And for the first time, I saw uncertainty on her face. I didn't think it was like that, she whispered. That sentence surprised me. Because maybe she truly didn't. Maybe everyone involved had convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. That was the hardest truth. Sometimes people don't hurt others because they think they are cruel. Sometimes they hurt others because they stop seeing them clearly. I took a deep breath. I'm not here to destroy this family. I looked at both of them. I'm here because Mom deserves to be seen again. Nobody spoke. But in that silence, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But awareness. And sometimes awareness is where change begins. The next morning, I did something I had been thinking about since I walked through that door. I sat with my mother at the kitchen table. No documents. No family discussions. No explanations. Just the two of us. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to solve a problem. I was listening. Mom, I said softly, what do you actually want? She looked confused. Not because she didn't hear me. Because I don't think anyone had asked her that question in a long time. What do I want? Yes. She looked down at her hands. The same hands that had packed my lunches as a child. The same hands that worked extra hours when money was tight. The same hands that held our family together when everything else was falling apart. I want to feel like I belong somewhere, she finally said. That answer was simple, but it carried years of pain. I reached across the table and held her hand. You do belong here. She smiled sadly. I know the house is yours. I shook my head.
No, Mom.
That's not what I mean. I looked around the kitchen. The house was never the gift. The gift was knowing you had a place where you felt safe. She became quiet. Then she said something I will never forget. I think I forgot that I was allowed to have needs. Those words stayed with me. Because sometimes the people who love others the most are the ones who slowly disappear. Not because someone takes everything from them at once, but because they keep giving pieces of themselves away. Later that afternoon, I asked Daniel and Clara to join us. This time, my mother sat at the head of the table.
Not me.
Not Daniel. Her. I wanted that small detail to matter. Because it did. I need to say something, my mother began. Her voice was nervous. I could see her fingers trembling slightly. But she continued. I appreciate everything you have done for me. I know you thought you were helping. Daniel looked down. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like this was my home. The room was silent. My mother took a breath. And I should have said something sooner. That was the part that surprised everyone. She wasn't blaming. She wasn't attacking. She was owning her silence. I allowed my fear of conflict to become more important than my own happiness. I watched my brother carefully. For the first time, he didn't look defensive. He looked like someone seeing the consequences of his choices from another person's eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, he finally said. 2 simple words. But they carried a weight I hadn't expected. My mother didn't immediately say everything was forgiven. She didn't pretend years of hurt disappeared in a moment. She simply nodded. I needed you to hear me. And that was enough for that day. Before going upstairs that evening, I placed something on my mother's dresser. A small envelope. Inside was a new set of house keys. Not because she needed permission to enter her own home, but because I wanted her to remember something. She was never a guest. She was the heart of the place. And somehow, the smallest key opened the biggest door. The door back to herself. The days after that conversation were quieter. Not peaceful exactly. Peace takes time. There were still uncomfortable moments. There were still conversations that felt unfinished. There were still memories that appeared unexpectedly and reminded us that healing doesn't erase the past. It teaches you how to carry it differently. My mother started making small changes. At first, they seemed almost invisible. She moved her favorite chair back, near the window. She placed her old collection of books on the living room shelf again. She bought the flowers she loved without asking anyone if they matched the house. Small things. But I noticed. Because I understood something now. When someone has spent years making themselves smaller, taking up space again feels like a brave decision. One afternoon, I found her sitting in the garden. The same garden I planted with her 7 years earlier. She was holding an old photograph. It was a picture of us standing in front of the house on the day we received the keys. "You know, it's funny," she said. "What?" "I thought this picture was about the house." She looked at it carefully. But it was never about the house. I sat beside her. "What was it about?" She smiled. "Being remembered." That answer stayed with me, because I realized my mother never needed a bigger home. She needed to know that her sacrifices had been seen. A few weeks later, Daniel asked if he could speak with me. We sat on the porch, where we used to sit as children during summer evenings. "I've been thinking about everything," he said. I waited. I kept telling myself I was helping because I was handling things. He looked down. But I think I liked feeling like the person in control. It was the first time he admitted something without trying to explain it away. And that mattered. "I'm not proud of how things happened," he continued. "I know." He nodded. "I don't expect Mom to forget." I appreciated that. Because real apologies don't demand immediate forgiveness. They simply acknowledge the hurt they caused. Over the next few months, things slowly changed. Not perfectly, not magically, but honestly. Daniel started including my mother in decisions again. Clara asked her opinion instead of assuming it. And my mother began saying what she thought instead of saying what everyone wanted to hear. One evening, I found her writing at the old wooden table that had been moved away years ago. The same table I found empty when I first arrived. "What are you writing?" I asked. She smiled. "A letter." "To who?" She looked at me. "To myself." I laughed softly. "That sounds important." "It is." She closed the notebook. For years, I wrote letters telling people I loved them. I think I forgot to write one telling myself that I mattered too. I didn't know what to say. Some moments don't need advice. They only need someone to witness them. That night, I walked through the house before going to bed. The lights were warm. The rooms felt alive again. Not because the furniture had changed. Not because everything was perfect. Because the woman who made it a home finally felt like she belonged inside it. And I realized something I wish I had understood sooner. Sometimes the greatest way to protect someone you love is not by fighting their battles for them. It is by reminding them they are strong enough to stand in their own. 7 months after I came home, I stood in the same place where everything began. The front door. The same brass handle. The same small crack in the walkway. The same garden reaching toward the sunlight. But somehow, everything felt different. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. When I first arrived, I thought I was coming back to save my mother. I thought I was the person with the answers. The person with the plan. The person who could fix what had been broken. But life has a way of teaching us that sometimes the people we think we are rescuing are actually the ones who teach us the most. My mother taught me that strength does not always look like fighting. Sometimes strength looks like speaking after years of silence. Sometimes it looks like admitting you were hurt. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself without losing your kindness. That winter, we had a small family dinner. Nothing extravagant. No big announcements. No dramatic apologies. Just people sitting around a table, trying again. My mother made her famous soup recipe. The one she used to make when Daniel and I were children. I watched everyone laugh over old memories. For a moment, I remembered the night I first came home. The empty spaces. The boxes. The feeling that something precious had been taken away. But now I understood something. The house was never the thing that was broken. The relationship was. And relationships aren't repaired by proving who is right. They are repaired when people finally become brave enough to be honest. After dinner, my mother handed me a small envelope. I smiled. "Another letter?" She laughed. "Yes." I opened it. Inside was a photograph. Not the old one. A new one. Taken that evening. All of us standing together. Not pretending. Not perfect. Just real. On the back, my mother had written, "Home is not where people stay. Home is where people are seen." I read that sentence several times. Because it explained everything. For years, I thought giving my mother a house was the greatest thing I could do. I was wrong. The greatest gift was helping her remember that her voice mattered, that her feelings mattered, that she mattered. A few days later, I left again for work. This time, leaving felt different. Before, I left believing my mother needed me to protect her. Now, I left knowing she trusted herself. As I drove away, I looked at the house in my mirror. The lights were on. The garden was still there. And my mother was standing by the window, waving. Not like someone saying goodbye, like someone saying, "I'll be okay." Years later, people sometimes ask me if I regret what happened. I always think about that question. Because yes, I wish my mother had never felt invisible. I wish our family had learned sooner. But I also know this. Some truths arrive late because they are waiting for people to become ready to understand them. That house gave my mother shelter, but finding her voice gave her freedom. And in the end, the secret I carried home wasn't a document. It wasn't a legal paper. It wasn't proof of ownership. The secret was something much simpler. A person can lose many things in life, but as long as they remember their own worth, they can always find their way home. Sometimes the deepest wounds in a family are not caused by one big moment, but by years of small things left unsaid. This story was never only about a house. It was about a mother who forgot her own worth, a daughter who learned that love means listening, and a family that discovered healing begins when people finally choose honesty over silence. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Never underestimate the power of making someone feel seen, valued, and loved. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more heartfelt stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, have you ever had a moment when you realized someone you loved was quietly carrying pain? Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it.